Welcome to This Week in Local, a Localogy podcast featuring lively conversations about the local digital ecosystem, hosted by Localogy analysts Mike Bolin and Charles Laughlin.
Hello and welcome to This Week in Local. Today I'm joined by Michael Hershfield, founder and CEO of Accrue Savings. Michael, welcome to the podcast.
Charles, thanks for having me.
Great to have you. So before we get into Accrue and Save Not Buy Later and all that, just walk us through your career path up to this point.
Well, first of all, I want to say I'm excited to be on the podcast. You know, I'm not from the United States. I grew up in Vancouver, Canada, and moved to New York about 12, 13 years ago. And I've been in tech before then. I started my first company in 2007. So through that journey, I've seen lots of things. I was an entrepreneur in the 2007, 8, so 9 before the economy collapsed. And then I moved to New York, and I've been at lots of different startups, all early stage, Series A, Series B, seed stage companies, roles, COO jobs, head of sales jobs, BD jobs, corp dev jobs. And most recently, I was at WeWork, where I ran sales globally for the co-working business. It was an amazing journey. And after that, I started Accrue 2 years ago, almost to the day.
Okay, so before we get into Accrue, you mentioned WeWork. Gotta ask. Well, I could ask 1,000 questions. I'm going to ask one. Did Jared Leto nail it?
I will tell you that if I squinted, I felt like I was there. And it wasn't just about Jared. It was also about the storylines. Listen, there's lots of artistic angles that were made to tell the story. But the energy was right. Jared was right. It was a very special experience. Obviously, there's been a lot of negative press about WeWork, and
sure,
lots can be said about it as a public company and the business model. But as a place to work and to innovate in a category, it was for me the greatest professional experience of my life, and it was a very special environment. That energy that Adam then reflected down to the whole company pulsated. And Jared, you felt that in the show. And so there was certainly brought up lots of memories of my own personal experience. And there are lots of stories, maybe Charles over a beer, I'm happy to tell you about.
Yeah, or a different, maybe we'll just do a podcast episode just of anecdotes about Adam. How about that? We'll do that another time. For today, we're going to talk about your new company, Accrue Savings. You were founded in 2021, is that right?
Yeah, we're exactly 2 years old. The company.
So exactly 2 years old. So it's still a new company, I guess. And 2021, interesting time to start your business, because I don't know if that was peak buy now, pay later, but it certainly was a robust, year for buy now, pay later. Sort of coming out of the pandemic, there was a big boost in e-commerce generally, but buy now, pay later took a lot of energy out of the pandemic. Why was that a good time to start a company that I'm going to call the anti-BNPL? You might disagree with that characterization, but why was that a good time to start that company?
I would say there were two observations. That a little bit of the origin story of the business. I mean, I have, when I moved to the United States, I always sort of observed this consumption framework that American consumers have, and I always sort of was fascinated by it. It's very unique. It's unique culturally. And I remember very vividly during the pandemic just being overwhelmed with credit options, buy now, pay later being one of them, credit card, consumer in-store credit options being other ones. And I felt very uncomfortable about it. I didn't understand why there was not a savings option. It wasn't a business idea, but back then, when I was just browsing the web, I was like, why can't I save for stuff with a particular retailer? It felt missing in the market, for me. And yes, we saw the boom of buy now, pay later, but it always felt a little icky. And when I really thought about starting the company, I remember telling my wife, I want to do this idea. And she said to me, are you crazy? American credits, Americans don't save. And there was a time period before I started the company, about 100 days, and I talk a little bit about this in other publications, where I did a 100-day sprint, and I had to close 5 retailers, 3 retailers. Ultimately, I closed 5 within 100 days. I had no deck, I had no product, and I had to tell the vision of a different story We're not anti-BNPL. What we are is an observation that a majority of Americans are actively saving for things right now, and there has never been a retailer solution to provide to consumers. We've spent 50 years innovating on credit, Charles. We've had Discover, Capital One, Diners Club. We have in-store credit cards. I mean, obviously, we all know the Macy's credit cards, the Bloomingdale's credit cards, the Dick's Sporting Goods credit cards, and now we have Buy Now Pay Later. It's all a repackaging of the same product, and the vision of the company is that not every consumer needs a credit option, especially Gen Zers and millennials. They need an alternative way to engage with brands. Yeah. And that has been this very small little idea, which is that every retailer in the United States should be offering a savings option for their consumers. It's become obviously something so much more than that in such a short period of time.
Okay, so let's, for our listeners' sake, let's do a little quick definition break. And I maybe kind of didn't do that in the question, which I should have. Save now, buy later is, as you said, a savings product. It's essentially I've always described it as a digital form of layaway or lay-by, depending where you're from and how you use that term. Yeah. Is that fair?
Yeah, I call it a co-branded savings account.
Okay, that's your term. My term is digital layaway. And,
yes,
but the idea is that you. Wait. Well, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. I love when I explain this to people. It's a piggy bank with your retailer that you love.
Okay, fair enough.
You and like for this, you want to buy something at where obviously you want to buy something you want to buy a mattress, but you can't afford it, or you don't want to buy credit, or you're not moving to the new house yet. I'm going to start putting money away with Casper to start saving up for that particular.
Is Casper a partner?
Casper is a partner of ours.
Okay.
And we'll talk about a bunch of different partners. We launched with CheapAware, one of the largest OTAs in the United States, a couple weeks ago. But like the idea here is that, and this is where you and I have engaged a little bit online, is that marketers at retailers and have spent a fortune with Facebook and Google, a fortune driving consumers through the funnel. The marketing funnel, someone has to be touched 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 times before they're ready to make the purchase, or we see the bounce rates at different pages on any given retailer website. And for Accrue, what is Accrue? Accrue is an offering that retailers give to consumers as an upper funnel, mid-funnel marketing tool. Consumers may take months before they're ready to make the purchase. What can you do to engage them outside of retargeting to them? And we think that having them create a savings plan to save up with the retailer they love is that opportunity. And it's offered through the retailer to engage with their particular consumer.
Okay. So you mentioned some generations, millennials, Gen Zs, et cetera. What is it's famous? Buy now, pay later is famously linked to Gen Z and millennial consumers, more Gen Z, I think, than any. What is your demographic profile? Does it differ substantially from buy now, pay later? And explain why it's the same or why it's different.
No, first of all, I would say first off, the buy now, pay laters are predominantly attracting millennial consumers. But it's interesting. What's the number one thing that millennials are most afraid of?
Debt.
Is debt. It's consumer debt. And so there's an interesting, unfortunate parallel between the usage of credit cards and buy now, pay later, and the fear and that anxiety that is manifested from that use cases. And obviously, in the next few months, as the student loan crisis comes back and rising delinquencies around credit cards, we're going to see what pain the American consumer might be feeling because of that significant credit usage over the last couple of years. And so for Accrue, our demographic is very similar. Debit card usage has exponentially grown. I think 5x in the last 5 years, both with millennials and Gen Zers. And so for us, we are a savings account. We're an FDIC savings account. And so we represent a use case for users that want to use their own money. What we have this phrase that we say internally, we want to own more, owe less, own more.
Yeah, no, that's fair. But didn't Nick Molnar use the term debit economy? Didn't he kind of make the same argument that debit card usage was a signal that buy now, pay later was going to take off? I remember hearing him on a podcast making the same argument.
It is very possible, and I think what we have seen, it is a poor packaging of what it really was. And I think I don't like being overly critical of the other, right? That both buy now, pay later and credit card. But I would say that what we have realized in the last couple of years is that buy now, pay later is a credit product. It's not a debit product, and it looks just like it just looks like a credit card. It looks just like it walks like a duck. It quacks like a duck. It's a duck, and
right.
Regulatory, obviously we're seeing increased regulations potentially associated with it.
Well, the Australian regulators have called that duck credit at this point.
Correct. And I do think, like, for Accrue, the opportunity is not to replace what consumers want to do. There is a place in the landscape, in the payment landscape, for buy now, pay later, the place in the landscape for credit cards. But what has never had its place in the sun was an embedded savings solution. Mm-hmm. And for millions, hundred plus a million Americans, and I think globally, who are actively saving for travel, who are actively saving for a home renovation, who are saving for a car, why shouldn't they get incentivized for their saving behaviors? That is money that should go to their savings account and not to Facebook and Google to pay for third-party cookies to try to drive them to the bottom of the funnel.
So I have a question kind of about how this is marketed, because I've made the point in things I've written that the difference between buy now, pay later and save now, buy later, and you may agree or disagree with this, that's fine either way, is the difference in the timing of the gratification. Whereas buy now, pay later is an immediate gratification product, and save now, buy later is a delayed gratification product. And sort of, I kind of made a joke that, dads would approve of save now, buy later because, it's kind of more aligned with kind of, what parents advise their children to do, which is, put off the gratification until it's paid for, until you've earned it, that kind of thing. And so it kind of meshes with that sort of responsible messaging, but it doesn't necessarily mesh with how culture works and that people want their things now. They want the satisfaction of receiving them now. So with buy now, pay later, you take immediate possession of the goods, deal with it later. With your model, it's the exact opposite. You save up for it, and when you've completed the purchase, you take possession, right? That's how it works.
Exactly. Exactly.
There's a very significant psychological difference between the two. And I'm wondering if you've thought that through, and if your messaging isn't aligned in any way with that thinking, and how you market this to consumers takes that into account in some way. I just talk about that a little bit.
So we think about a lot. I mean, there are two assumptions to your question, and I want to answer each one specifically. One is Accrue is trying to introduce a new consumer behavior, or pained consumer behavior that parents try to impose or teach to their children. And I would argue, and our data indicates, that Americans right now are saving. Right, they're saving for travel. There are a number of categories of behaviors that 60+% of Americans are actively saving for, like, basically 5 or 6 categories of items: travel, home, car, jewelry.
Are you mapping your business along those categories?
Electronics, etc. So when you actually you'll see us in the next 6 to 12 months, get a major enterprise account in each one of those, if not a couple in each one of those major categories. And so I first, and this is where, like, your question to start was around how did I come up with the idea, was I looked under a rock where no one was looking. And that was that people are actively saving. And so this product, which is Accrue, an embedded savings account or a co-branded savings account, is not asking people to do things for what they are not doing already. And that's sort of like comment number one. The second comment is around the dopamine around instant gratification. And I think this is where product development and product design needs to feed some of that urge that getting something represents. And I think that certainly we think a lot about how we are designing our product to give users inspiration and joy so they can feel the rewards of the free money as they deposit their first deposit, as they achieve certain milestones in their savings journey. Those things are not going to replace the new pair of pants you may have purchased or the car you may have bought, because you need those things potentially, or you want those things. But at least it gives you some of that immediate gratification, instant gratification that you're looking for. And that's how we reflect both on the product development side, but also like the TAM market opportunity associated with it.
Okay. Do you think your TAM is the same as any other payment solution, or is it the same as buy now, pay laters? Is your total addressable market essentially the same? Or how do you think about your total addressable market?
I believe that every American needs and wants some version of this, whether they, and this is when we, Charles, I want to stop and talk a little bit about the mission. Like the mission
Fine.
really believes that every consumer, deserves the thing they want, should be given, empowered, the opportunity. They don't need to take on credit to do that. So, unfortunately, there are, many Americans are struggling right now, and so they need help to save up for particular items. And it could be for back to school. It could be to help their loved ones go to get equipment for sporting goods. It could be that they need a new television in their house or a washer and dryer. And the reality is for us is that it can't be the only way is to take on massive credit to get those things.
Right.
There needs to be another way to do that. And for us, the addressable audience is the entire American population who have different stages in their economic journey, but ultimately are needing this behavior, do this behavior in their daily life.
Okay. So I want to shift the conversation a bit to the merchant side. You mentioned travel a couple of times, and we wrote about it recently where you have a enterprise partnership with Cheapo Hair. I don't mean to chuckle at that name. I'm sure they want to get people to chuckle a little bit when they say Cheapo Hair. But the reason I thought that was interesting, I mean, it's a big deal, but I think travel is an interesting vertical for this space, because getting to kind of what I just said about immediate gratification and dopamine and all that stuff, the thing with travel is if you use buy now, pay later to buy a plane ticket to Bali, you go to Bali, you enjoy the sun and all that, you come back and you still have to probably have a few more payments left on that ticket. Yeah. If you go to Bali with Save Now, Buy Later, it's all paid for. You can enjoy the trip and come back and it's done. That made me think, that's probably a pretty good category for what you're doing versus buy now, pay later. Talk about that, why that category is a good category for your particular model.
I'll talk about it too. The number one category that Americans are saving for right now is travel. Americans right now, 29% of Americans right now are actively saving for a trip that they want to go on. And that is a humongous opportunity when we know in an economy that's driven through experiences, people want and need the ability to go to Bali for a trip they want, or they want to go visit Florida to visit their family and friends in those places.
Yeah.
And I think to reflect on, again, that there has not been a product that responds to the needs of consumer behavior right now is where we sort of try to fit in. And obviously, we're really proud of the partnership with Cheapo Hair, one of the largest OTAs in the United States, to start to introduce this as a framework to think about how to engage consumers, right? From a merchant perspective, from an OTA or travel perspective, they continue to do similar things: loyalty programs, credit card programs, buy now, pay later. There is a Facebook advertising, Google advertising. There's a relative rinse and repeat of a certain set of tools, and we say, well, hold on, there's another tool available to you, which is trying to get people to start saving for engaging them earlier in their discovery, in their journey, build affinity pre-purchase, get them to start to save with you, and then they'll save for you, and they're going to spend with you, and it's going to be much cheaper to acquire them than try to chase them through those other channels. And so obviously we're really excited about it. The other statistic, obviously outside of that Americans in, 1 in 5 Americans right now are going into credit card debt to go on travel. 1 in 4 men are going into debt, and it's over $500 or more, majority of that credit card debt. And so it goes back to your comment, Charles, is that pain that you will feel post dopamine is quite significant. $500 in credit card debt is quite significant. And for 20-ish% of Americans to feel that pain,
Mhm.
ultimately it starts to compound itself. And we have to be careful about, as a society, about what are we building? Like, are we building it? How much of a debt society are we building? There is another way, and retailers have a role to play in that. We have greater influence than ever, retailers do, on how people live their lives.
So further on the notion of the retailer, because I'm making this comparison a lot. You're probably used to it, but with buy now pay later, the merchants kind of pay a fee, right? But what they get from that is they get a stream of purchases, and there are a lot of stats about increasing basket size and so on and so forth. What are the metrics or what are the points that you point to say, here's what's in it for the merchant?
It's a great question, and again, it goes back to the funnel. The statistics that you referred to around buy now pay later is a bottom funnel. They are optimizing that 1.2% of the consumers that ultimately get to checkout. For us, it's a much different audience, much larger audience, right? It's 98% of the consumers that never make it to the checkout page. So we talk about, and what we have seen with our merchants is decreasing their CAC, cost of acquisition of customer, because they're acquiring customers much earlier before they're ready to make the purchase. We're also allowing them to acquire customers that wouldn't have purchased with them. They might have gone to a different retailer because of it. And so that sort of accretive revenue, acquiring customers that would have been lost to them, is being tremendously beneficial to our early retailer base, which is why we've continued to grow and expand both with our existing partners and with new partners.
Okay. Now, a couple more sort of more mechanical questions. Now, with buy now pay later, you miss a payment, there's fees, there's penalties, there's pain once the payments are missed. That's kind of where a lot of the friction has come up. What happens? Let's say I've take out a save now buy later account for whatever, a plane ticket to Bali, and I miss a payment or I fall behind. I fail to fulfill on the savings plan that I've set out. What happens? How do you adjust to these circumstances?
Charles, this is the power of the product. The consumer opens up an FDIC savings account. It's just like their own Wells Fargo, Chase,
Right.
Bank of America account. So these aren't payments. This is a wallet that you're putting money
Deposits,
towards.
right? Yeah.
You're putting money towards that trip you want to go on your own terms. And the product allows you, is flexible, that you could, if you need to pause it because you need to pay for something or for something else in your life, you're not going to make those payments, and there's no penalty. You're incentivized to do it on your own terms. That's the whole idea. Is the power is in the consumer. That this is about consumers having the power rather than retailers having the power. And if you want to go faster on your trip, Charles, you can also ask loved ones to contribute. One of the key features of Accrue is a crowdfunding feature. Ask your friends and family to help pay for your trip. Hey, I'm going on a trip to Bali. You ask your friends for it. They fund your account. And so you might get your $1,000 or $2,000 that you need for that flight and hotel in Bali faster because your loved ones contributed towards it, your friends contributed to it. And you may not be able to afford that contribution because you need to pay for rent that month or something God forbid happened. That is the mechanism that consumers need to know they can get to their goal in a bunch of different ways in their own time.
Okay. All right. So kind of wrapping up a little, what are every business has yardsticks that they measure themselves by to determine whether it's working or not. What are your, I guess, yardstick KPIs would be the better term, but what do you look at and say, if these metrics are hitting these levels, we're doing well. If they're falling short, something's wrong. What are your major measuring sticks, excuse me?
We have a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
And when we think about where we were and where we are and where we want to go over the next year or two, it's very clear that because we know what the 5 or 6 major categories that Americans are actively saving for, we want to make sure we have partners that believe in the mission and the value of the business and that are certain scale that can help offer this to the consumer base. So we continue to look for great partners that are in travel, that are in auto, that are electronics, that are in home, that are in jewelry, that are in car, everything I mentioned. And so we go and we measure ourselves by have we partnered with merchant partners in those categories, and that's how we're holding ourselves accountable as it relates to how we partner with our retailers, how we see them see value from this product. Again, the pain points are very clear, right? They have a tremendous pain around CAC. Can we help them reduce their cost of acquisition of customers? Can we be accretive to their revenue, right? So that when they look at us after prioritizing it and pushing it us to their user base, are we adding net new revenue to the business that they wouldn't have seen before? Those are all ways that we show value to ultimately to merchants. But in the end, it's about the consumer. Our yardsticks is the joy that our consumers feel by using the product. The fact they don't buy the thing and feel debt and resentment to both the retailer and themselves. Ultimately, that's what it means. It's about bringing joy to the consumer base, which will ultimately lead to success for both the consumer and merchant and for us.
I did read a statistic this morning. I was kind of poking around, looking for some more data points just to throw around. There was something I found on Bankrate. I don't know if they were the source or if there's a different source, so forgive me there. But 57% of buy now, pay later consumers regretted the purchase. What would be a number that you could live with? I mean, 5%, I don't know. Maybe that's an unfair question, but that statistic blew my mind. 57%.
By the way, it goes back to earlier on I mentioned that what is the thing Americans, millennials are most fearful for love? They're fearful of credit. They're fearful of credit card debt. And that's an analog parallel to that data point that you've reflected, that you just commented on right now. And again, I think we have spent the last 50 years as a system pushing credit options to consumers. And so we those that are in power, those that have positions of influence, continue to offer this to the consumer base. We haven't shown them there are other alternatives. And for us, if we provide consumers this alternative, it is clear that Americans are going to use it. Right? This is because the fact that there's this engagement has already happened. So it's not about can we help this anxiety and fear go away? Yeah, obviously we can, because consumers are going to, but the reality is about what are consumers going to do? And we believe they're going to actively save up for things.
Okay. Sort of last question. I never promise it's the last question because you never know. But what are some macro stats or trends or whatever that you look for in the economy, society, or whatever, that are positive, that are tailwinds for your business?
Well, there are certain secular trends right now that bring us pause, and I want to sort of start there.
Okay.
Right, we're seeing over $1 trillion in credit card debt in the United States, and that's a rising number. We're seeing, actually, when you look at the rising delinquency rates for credit cards, particularly the credit card companies that partner with co-branded credit cards, there's a rising delinquency rates in credit cards in the United States, and so those statistics. And actually, obviously, we're seeing this sort of obviously significant headwinds around buy now, pay later. Those statistics bring pause with the fact that the product market fit of those credit options during a bull era might be in question, and the consumers really want another choice. That's a macro trend that I think that merchants certainly recognize. They know what their funnel is looking like. They recognize that the usage of BNPL might not be as high now as it was before, or with their credit cards that they've been using, that their co-branded credit cards having rising delinquency rate. What does that mean for loyalty? Like loyalty from a consumer perspective with the particular brand they may be building their own credit debt associated with. Those are things where the sensitivity where the consumer is requires us as Accrue to find those partners that are aware of the pain that the American consumer is feeling.
Okay. One thing, this is more of a comment, but you can add something to it. I've noticed, for example, if you go to a Klarna and read one of their press releases and you do a word search, the one phrase you can't find in there, guess what it is?
Debt?
Buy now, pay later. I don't know what that means, but I think what it means is that you mentioned the headwinds, I think, and the regulatory stuff that we talked about earlier. I think, and I've noticed this kind of across the board, that companies that are in buy now, pay later shy away from that phrase increasingly. And I don't know if you've noticed that or if you see anything in that.
I mean, I it's funny you say that. I haven't noticed it, but it's an interesting observation. What was hot in that moment, may not be necessarily hot today. And I think those are companies that are trying to define themselves away from what investors don't want to hear. And certainly when we look at the buy now, pay later space, you're seeing significant capitalization requirements, right? The economy needed huge capital infusion. You're seeing what a firm's public market is. There's increased need for capital in that market to drive those businesses. And I think that for them to reposition themselves as something different is a marketing story, right? That they are trying to tell a story to the public market or to the private market as it relates to their financing, to sort of say that they stand for something more than who they are. But again, these are all buy now, pay later companies. That's their primary use case. And the question is, can they redefine themselves, or are the banks and the credit card companies and the PayPals of the world going to eat their lunch over time?
We'll see, I guess. Unfortunately, I actually have a few more questions I'd love to ask you, but we are actually out of time, so I'm going to have to wrap it up here. Thanks, everyone, for listening. This has been This Week in Local. Stay tuned every week for more episodes. I'm your host, Charles Laughlin. My co-host is Mike Boland. Thanks to today's guest, Michael Hershfield of Accrue Savings. You can find the show on all major podcast networks, and you can learn more at Localogy.com. Please subscribe, like, and review this podcast. Your engagement really helps others find us. Our producer is Dara Sweat. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Localogy's This Week in Local with Mike Boland and Charles Laughlin. Be sure to subscribe for more.